Welcome to this Jsonnet introduction. Jsonnet is a programming language which is used to produce JSON documents. It compiles to JSON, it supports libraries, and it provides a code formatter. JSON is used by a lot of tools, for example, as a configuration format. It is compatible with YAML files, which makes it very useful, for example, for Kubernetes configurations. However, it's bringing a lot of repetition and boilerplate for complex configuration. It's not user-friendly either. It doesn't support comment nor trailing commas. In the next example, we will see how JSONet can help. You don't have to understand the JSONet code just yet, but it will illustrate the advantages of using JSONet. The example we will use is the replication of an infrastructure in Docker Compose, where we have the client contacting the server through the front-end network and the server contacting the Redis server through the back-end network. We will write a Docker Compose file for this infrastructure. Let's take a look at it. We see that we define the networks, front-end and back-end, and the services, the client, the server, and the Redis. However, when looking at the networks, we see there is a lot of repetition. The driver is the same for both networks. They are both internal, and actually only the IP information is changing. If you want some flexibility and you want to be able to start multiple clients, you have to write another YAML file. With JSONet, we will see it can be parameterized. At the left side, we have the Docker Compose file, and at the right side, we have the JSONet code that is generating the same file. We see that we start by importing a library that we will take a look at the end of this session. We can define the networks. We see that we also define the client, the web server, and the Redis server, and that we finally, on the last line, combine all those elements in one Docker Compose file. Without trying to understand the code, we already see that we can provide all the information that we provided in the Docker Compose file. For the networks, for example, we have the network name, the range, and the gateway. All this is the information that we want to be able to specify. And it's also the only information that is interesting because the driver is the same for both networks. We don't want to specify it in the JSONnet code. This means that the information density is much higher in the JSONnet code. If we decide to follow some conventions, our code can even be much smaller. Here it is. It's using a new version of the Docker Compose JSONnet library. We see that we define the client, the web server, and the Redis, and we combine them to generate the Docker Compose. The conventions that we decided to use are to always use the same network ranges and to link the machine number to its network address. For example, the client is machine number 1, and the host component of its IP address will be 1. And finally, the Redis server always has the same address. These conventions give us a high degree of flexibility. Let's see what we can do if we need 5 clients and 8 servers. This is done by the second example on the right side of the slide. The client's variable is an array of client services that we define. We do the same for the web servers. We just make sure that we don't reuse a machine number. The last code example gives a function which takes the number of clients and the number of web servers as parameters. This shows that we can parameterize our code very easily. You might think this is enabled by a very large library, but this is not the case. Here it is at the right side. It's the same length as the Docker Compose we wrote at the start of the chapter, but it gives us a lot more flexibility and a much higher information density in the code. And that's it for the example. As a recap, Jsonnet is a programming language with a syntax close to JSON and which is compiled to JSON documents. Being a programming language, it is much easier to manage, and it brings a lot of flexibility, as is shown by the last code excerpt. This code allows us to test our app in a Docker Compose setup with any number of clients and any number of web servers. Doing this in a Docker Compose YAML file would be a lot of work and a lot of maintenance burden. I hope you enjoyed this introduction and are interested in more information about Jsonnet. If you are a self-learner, go to jsonnet.org. There is a lot of documentation there. Otherwise, I hope you are interested in this training and will enjoy it. The training is made of 6 additional parts, with the same approach as this introduction. We cover the whole Jsonnet language and see code examples for each concept and syntax introduced. Note, however, that no exercise is provided.